Welcome to Succession Stories, Insights for Next Generation Entrepreneurs. I'm Laurie Barkman. I've spent my career bringing an entrepreneurial approach to mature companies struggling with change. As an outside executive of a third-generation, 120-year-old company, I was part of a long-term succession plan. Now I work with entrepreneurs, privately held companies, and family businesses to develop innovations that create enterprise value and transition plans to achieve their long-term goals. On this podcast, listen in while I talk with entrepreneurs who are driving innovation and culture change. I speak with owners who successfully transition their company and others who experience disappointment along the way. Guests also include experts in multi-generational businesses and entrepreneurship. If you are a next-generation entrepreneur looking for inspiration to grow and thrive, or an owner who can't figure out the best way to transition their closely held company, this podcast is for you. I really enjoyed my conversation with Ann Dugan. Ann is a business entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur. She created and ran the Institute of Entrepreneurial Excellence, one of the longest-standing university-based entrepreneurial programs in the U.S. focused on family enterprises. And during that time, she worked with more than 1,000 companies, spanning nearly 30 years prior to her own succession there. Ann's expertise in private company succession, board governance, and family philanthropy stems not only from her experience with her family's fifth-generation company, but also from her work with the Family Office Exchange and National Philanthropic Trust. Our conversation covered a lot of ground. Ann shared super valuable insights for how to break the tradition of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I did. Thanks for tuning in. And I'm really looking forward to speaking with you. You have such amazing experience with family businesses and succession. I feel like you're perfect for this show. I understand you're in a 4th generation family business.
That is right, with the 5th generation not only on the horizon, but actively involved. So it keeps on moving.
So tell me about the company.
So the company was started really in 1890, thereabouts. And we started actually in growing trees and cutting trees and planing trees for lumber and distributing that through the Southeast. So we're in Brunswick, Georgia, between Savannah and Jacksonville. And as the generations move forward, we got out of tree growing. And of course, another family at that time bought everything up, which was the Weyerhaeuser family, which still exists today. The Weyerhaeuser family, very active family, but not necessarily in operations these days. And then we move forward to distributing lumber. And then in the 3rd generation, we got involved in building supply. So building supply for the contractor, not necessarily for the residential, home tinker, environment. And so we've been in a good place there on the coast. We follow the swings of the commercial and housing markets, obviously, as contractors have been through, the dynamics up and down through especially over the last 15 years, as we've had, the mortgage crisis and everything come to a halt, and then the restart. And now there's been some quietness, not too much, but some quietness over the pandemic. So ups and downs.
Understandable. Of course, ups and downs. And I noticed on your LinkedIn, it made me smile. You have listed this business on your profile, and the start date is 1905. So you've been with the company a really long time.
So 1890 is really when the business started, but my great-grandfather was with another fellow. So in 1905, my great-grandfather bought out the other, side, and it's been a single family owned ever since.
That's great. Did you work in the company?
No, I didn't. And it's an interesting story that you asked that. So in I won't say the year because my mother might hear this. So it's through my mother's side of the family. And my grandfather, 2nd generation, had 2 boys and 2 girls, my mother being, one of those girls. And so my grandfather at the time said, and this is, we have to understand, my mother's 93, her sister's 91. His mantra was, you need to go to college and find a husband and get married and, have a household and do those things that traditional Southern women did at the time. The boys would have the operating company. The girls would have real estate. And that's how, in his mind, real estate was passive. Their husbands could come on and take that on, as they move forward. And it wasn't a bad deal. You look at St. Simon's Island, Jekyll Island, Sea Island are the three islands that we primarily service over time. And so owning real estate there was not a bad deal. So that was in his mind, how to take care of the girls, quote unquote, and make sure that the boys were okay. So that became the mantra up until, late in the third generation. And girls could not work in the operating company. It was only the boys. And I would say probably, I'll get the year, particularly wrong, but I'll say early 60s. My aunt joined the company. And the reason that she did is she said to her husband, my uncle, who was CEO at the time, listen, I don't like this idea that some weeks we have good paychecks and other weeks we have nothing. And I have three boys I have to feed and in a household to run, and I need to go and find out what's happening in the company. And so he said, oh, you can't do that. Dad would really be upset. No girls in the company, et cetera. She came from a grocery owning family, so she understood keeping your finger on the pulse of business, on numbers, on slim profit margins, all of those good things. So she came in and took a look around, and the rest is history. She was horrified at what she saw. My uncle, her husband, and my grandfather had given credit to every contractor that asked for it. And back then, in a small town, that was how things went. But there was no credit. There was no, collateral. There was no, it was a promise like, yeah, I'll pay you one day, kind of thing. And so from that period forward, her name is Marcel. If you wanted credit, you had to go see Marcel. And Marcel did not give credit easily. And so I look at her as being a key point in time of really changing the pathway of the company, making it much more profitable, running with good business processes. And that's why even today when I work with families, it's, really look at the talent throughout your family, not just those that are in the business, but those that marry into the family, those that, graduate from college or other activities, within the family, and look at, how do we tap in all of the skills of the family, not just, those at any particular point in time.
I love Aunt Marcel. She sounds awesome. Wouldn't we love to sit with her and talk to her about her experience from the early 60s? Wow, what a change she made to the company.
She did.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question about that, about the men working in the operating business and women working in real estate. Was that cultural in the South at the time, or was that something specific to your family?
No, I think it was absolutely cultural. Women did not get involved in business. And especially, when you were from a prominent Southern family, not only was my grandfather, the, second generation leader of this, significant family business locally that provided great employment and, lots of opportunities, for vitality within the community. But also he was mayor for a number of years on and off. My uncle was county commissioner. I mean, we were really infused in the community. And so having two daughters who would go off to college and marry well was a typical, Southern process at that time in a small town. And that was his hope. Unfortunately, I'll say both of my mother and her sister married well, but they've also had incredible careers themselves. And so he got part of his wish.
Well, I'm sure ultimately was very proud of them. Did your mother end up working in the company too?
No, and not at all. In fact, my mother is a PhD psychologist, has built, an incredible career in that field for herself, continues to provide, some consulting and engagement today at the age of 93. But she really took that idea, and this is sort of the mantra of my family. Everybody does something. So from an early age on, there was no trust fund babies. There's nobody hanging out, waiting for something to be done for you. And I really give, the third generation a lot of credit for this. My mother, her sister, her two brothers, everybody does something. And they really took that mantra to heart and worked hard at creating a life for themselves. Some in the business, some outside the business, always owners at some level. And that became important for her in particular. So she's built an esteemed career as a forensic and grief consultant, as well as, professional up till the time she retired.
Well, I love the story of strong women. So instead of steel magnolias, we have lumber magnolias, but they sound fantastic.
Sure.
So I was curious about you. So your choices when you were coming up through the family and understanding the family business, seeing your Aunt Marcel running it, did you think, hey, this is something you wanted to do, or are you eager to do something different?
Well, my career had taken me on different paths, and I was outside of the Brunswick, Georgia area, and I actually settled here, in Pittsburgh. And as I was going to the University of Pittsburgh and looking at various opportunities that provided me here, I met my husband. And so at that particular point in time, he had his own company, and was not transferable to another state. So, as we got married and started to raise our family, I was settled here. And so, I would say my biggest role with our family business has been governance. And that is that I was a confidant and a consultant, a board advisor to my aunt and uncle as they were going through, their development of the company, moving into building supply, which was a big, foray at the time. As I was looking at what was going to happen, or what did I want to do next, I should say, I ran into a young couple who were in the process of creating locally the first franchise of home delivery, fast delivery of pizza. And that became 4-Star Pizza. And I spent many years as they were building up to, I think at the very end, when I left, we were probably at around 150 units around the world. And so in that whole arena, I'll say by 1987, Wesley Posvar, who was the chancellor at the University of Pittsburgh and someone I had gotten to know while I was a student there, along with his wife, Mildred, had asked me, we have this small entrepreneurship program called the Small Business Development Center here at the university, and it's really struggling. And can you come in and take a look at it? Because, you're this entrepreneur, you're running around doing this or that. So I said, sure, I'll come take a look. I'll do what I can to help, but I'll never work at a big bureaucracy. And that began my 28-year run at the University of Pittsburgh.
And that sounds like famous last words. I'll never work there. And then you're there for almost 30 years. That's incredible. I didn't realize that. I love that story. So it really opened your eyes because they contacted you. It wasn't something that you were thinking about.
No, it wasn't something I was thinking about at the time. And it just ended up to be a great opportunity because entrepreneurship was a total unknown, not only at the University of Pittsburgh, but at all universities and colleges. It's much more known today. And so that really led me to look at all of the opportunities in entrepreneurship that could happen. And the number one was family business. And that's when I said, we really need to create a program for family businesses. It was the early 90s by then. And a lot of, our family businesses locally were servicing the steel industry. And many of them were waiting for the steel industry to come back. But really by the late 80s, it wasn't coming back. And even if it would one day, it wasn't going to come back at the level that it had been. And so they were really struggling, whether they were a supplier of product or metal or transportation or temporary help or whatever it was. Those family businesses had to reinvent and reignite. And I said, we could do that here, in terms of the family, creating a family enterprise center. And that's what we did. And I had some of the most incredible leaders in Western Pennsylvania in their family businesses, agree after I courted them, obviously, and asked them saying, we need to do this here because the, family businesses are the rock bed of any community and still are today. They're the ones that don't, pick up and move because there's an incentive, a financial incentive to relocate to another state or to, do things differently. They're the rocks done well. They're the rocks of Gibraltar for any community. They continue to provide employment, have a long-term vision, a long-term commitment to the region. And that's where I felt that we could do better with the family, business area. So I got the University of Pittsburgh to agree that I could create that. And really that became, the genesis of the Institute for Entrepreneurial Excellence, because we had now two things. If you think of the life cycle of entrepreneurial activity, we had the startup side, which was the Small Business Development Center. And then we had the family business side, which was really that mature, good things in place, but how do we reinvent ourselves and become entrepreneurial again? And that was the two. And then later on, they became blended into the Institute for Entrepreneurial Excellence with several other things that I created.
As you said, an underlying part of it were the family businesses that stay here and are a thriving part of the community for employment and for people to want to be here and make a difference. And your center ultimately, call it IEE just for short, how many family businesses did you work with over let's say, I don't know what period of time, if you want to say the 30 years, but just in ballpark, can you give a sense?
Oh, it was well over 1,000 for sure during that period of time. And then in 2010, I created a membership program because up till that point, we were one off. You know, you would call us or you would hear an ad or whatever it is. You know, we'd speak at a program and you call us for assistance. My board said, listen, instead of like living on the, waiting for someone to help us out, let's create a membership organization so we can continually and consistently help. And so we did that. And at that point in time, we ended up with about 350 closely held businesses, mostly family businesses, but some of them might be two families or a group of entrepreneurs that had moved past the startup phase and were looking at how to, really build sustainability and capability in their team that were part of the organization. And we just continued. I think at one point we got up to a close to 500 members annually that belonged.
In your years in working with family businesses, when the next generation got their new role, right? When the next generation came up to Gen 3 or Gen 4, what does that look like normally? Do they sort of live in status quo for a while before they're comfortable leading change, or are they leading it before they even get the baton? How does that typically happen?
That's a really great question. And I want to say that every family is unique. They do this in a different way. I can say that today, and really over the last 7 years, there's been much more discussion and activities and learning about family business than there has been in the past. In 1989-90, when we really launched the Family Enterprise Center, it was misunderstood and nascent because people would go, oh, it's all those rich kids, that are entitled and, they've inherited, this business and this wealth and they're not doing anything. And, maybe there was some of that. I would say in general, that as the world has evolved today, the idea that, a second generation in particular, they're respectful of the founding generation, the first generation. They don't like to rock the boat. They like to make sure that, dad or mom or whoever is that senior generation founder and leader, are okay with what they're doing. And so they tend to be risk adverse and be caretakers or placeholders. That's changed, I'd say, definitely in the last 7 to 10 years, where not only they get in and they don't rock the boat day one, they might be doing it through their college projects or sometimes high school projects, saying, hey, I think this is something we could consider or do differently. But, in general, a family needs good communication and good collaboration so no one feels threatened. I used to hear all the time, listen, we're fine. Everything's great. Our profits are great. Revenue is great. Why be the spouting whale? Because what happens is the spouting whale gets harpooned. We're fine. And that went, in some families that goes on for a long time till there's a big hiccup, like a pandemic, like a labor shortage. Those are the kinds of things. And all of a sudden the family goes, oh, maybe we should have been forward planning a little bit stronger or more proactively. And I think that's where you see today families looking for that, especially family leaders, where is that innovation coming from? Because it's not just in their products and services over the last, 5-7 years, it's in their use of technology. It's in their labor pool and their labor, activities. As you look at employment today needs more than just a paycheck. A lot of things they need to innovate into. How do we market? Every traditional area of business today needs innovation, and smart, strong family businesses get that and are actively involved with it.
Yeah, and it probably involves their teams around them, that they're driving the culture from the top and giving the permission, if you will, for the rest of the organization to look for opportunities for not only continuous improvement, but innovation, which takes something to another level, whether it's adjacent change or a completely new market or a completely new service. And that I find in conversations sometimes with companies, it's harder for them to really make lasting change unless they have the keys, so to speak. I've talked with some next generation CEOs, and when they say, yeah, I kind of have half a key, or I want to make change, but there's always a but, right? Whether it's my dad is chairman and we're not really ready. What do you think are some of the things holding companies back? You mentioned risk aversion. I totally understand that, and the financials needing to be there. But do they see it as R&D, and that invest for the future? Or is it more of like where you were just talking about where, oh no, we need to do something different. There's something, we didn't see it coming. So now we're reacting.
Yeah, and so I think those are, your three, sort of, stories there are all, again, every family is unique. So I've seen all of them. Part of what I, recommend in earlier the better is to have that kind of communication and that collaboration so that all the family understands the culture. And the culture of the family business is really rooted in their values. So as the next generation, if you haven't really set your values right now, it's time to just, block the time, this weekend, next weekend, and say, we really need to have, and there's lots of good data points out there, but a good process to understand what are our 5 top common core values, and then how do we make those alive in our business so that no matter what kind of change we're looking at, thinking about innovation itself, we're allaying the fears, because, change happens when people feel, comfortable that it's going to be a thoughtful process. It's not going to take 2 or 3 years. It's going to be a thoughtful process, but we need to move this forward and stop being fearful of change. And especially as, the older you get, the more fearful you are of change. Let's just stay where we are and not worry about it. But getting back to your core values on a regular basis, especially as you're going through times where it's important to think about what's next in the market. What's the market telling you? How do we move forward as a group? And I think it's not only the family team, but it's the team within the company itself. Because many times, and I'll use the example of the IT area, those are people that have been with the company, treasured employees, for 35 or 50 or 60 years because they've grown up, with the family business. But sometimes they can be barriers to change as well. And I've been with so many families where, I think that, your accounting system or your financial system, your supply system needs a little bit of modernization. Oh, they're like, oh no, Mary or John in the accounting department would never let that happen. Well, we got to find a way to bring Mary and John along because they're comfortable with their system. And I've seen in the last 5 years, ledger systems by pencil, that are still being deployed
Wow.
by Mary or John. Okay, we need to move the whole team forward. And I'll give, just one sample, case study of why that's important in the last few years. I have a family, a national family, highly recognized, if I told you the name and their brand and so forth, and they're in the hospitality and I'll say fast food business. And, 2 that have been really hammered over the last, 5 months. And so the family came together and said, wait a minute, we're second and third generation, but our first generation was very entrepreneurial. We've been somewhat entrepreneurial in second and third, but we need to be more. And so they really went back to their entrepreneurial spirit, read some of the history, and not only, in the second generation who knew it really well because it was their father, but the third generation, and saying, how did grandpa and great grandpa in this case take advantage of the opportunities that were out there and be opportunistic? And so they went back to their values, that he was very innovative. He was opportunistic. He took advantage of looking around the market. He didn't what I call belly button gaze. He was actually picked his head up and looked around and saw what was happening and where his company could take advantage of things. They looked at their financial strength, which is a value because they never live at the end of their paycheck or the end of their debt, or they're constantly looking at, how do we have the resources to move forward? Professional integrity was always a big part of their company. And so they really agonized over some of the things that came out, like the PPP and, other kinds of government help. Like, how does that work for our business today and tomorrow? And then they brought the management employees together because they were worried, because most of them if not 90% were, on layoff because of the industries they're in and everything being closed. And so the CEO, who is a family member right now, was really sending out, twice a month, incredibly important letters about what the family owners were thinking about. They were talking about some of the innovations that were on their minds. They were forming virtual teams to really work on some of these, to create solutions or options for some of the things that they were thinking about when the world reopens. And so it was really important to go back to their values and look and have that as the basis for how they were going to look at innovation and change when, the world reopens. And I think they're going to be in an absolutely great place.
That's right. I think that's right. There's a lot of people and companies focusing on the core, which is the right thing to do, right? Buttoning up the financials, making sure they have money in the bank, securing all the things from the government that they can. And that's sort of step one. And that's a place to be for sure. And then not giving up on investing in the innovation side of the business. There's a wonderful article and research around that from McKinsey that came out recently. And then also, of course, the classic HBR study. I wrote a blog post about this quite recently, and I'll include a link to it in the show notes. It's the companies who protect the core, do the operational effectiveness work, do the belt tightening, if you will, whatever they need to do to make sure that they're financially sound. But at the same time, they're balancing their R&D, their innovation work, and the key initiatives to make sure that dynamic shifts in the market that they are continuing to invest. And that's not an easy thing to do, but that starting from the top and driven all the way through the company and that culture back to the values, as you pointed out, all those things tying together. So it's the companies that invest in both and continue to have that balance and not walk away, if they can, financially, of course, not walk away from those initiatives. So I love that you shared that example.
Good. I think those are all important. And, sometimes with families, again, as you had summarized, there's a reluctance to change or to do things. There's a cultural issue. And I encourage families not only to, go out there and look at, having dad, mom, or the senior generation, whatever, to really feel comfortable by looking at, okay, it's not son or daughter, cousin, nephew, whatever, saying do this or do that. Let's look at what others are doing. And that's where, just bringing in a TED Talk, or recommending a TED Talk to look at, together, whether it's on, culture change, leadership, innovation, it helps, have another expert, so to speak, in the room. And then, the Family Business Magazine is a national, international now, magazine out of Philadelphia that's really incredible. It's chock full of family stories that have a long-term view. We're going to remain a family-held, family-owned company, for at least until the end of the earth, which is what one family told me. And so they have to have a way not only to innovate for today, but also preparing the generation for tomorrow, because the research is that families typically grow faster than the wealth. And so not everybody can take a paycheck out of the company. So how are we going to manage ownership into the future so that we don't have some that work in the company, but then there's others outside the company waiting for their distribution check. So there's a lot of good, best practices out there, how to balance all of that. Think about it. Think about what works for your family. And that's, a really important part of preparation as well.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about your decision to retire. And you went through your own succession process because you ran IEE for 30 years. And what was it like for you to go through the process?
I would say, great question. And it's, that's probably like another 3-hour, webinar to talk about that. But it was a hard process. I had been going through it with family leaders. I believed and I taught, and the research showed, timely succession is really important. And it helps, really that next generation to, move into leadership and help, to really flourish and grow in their ideas and the next generation. So here I am teaching it to family businesses. And I had one of my, so I had at that point, we were 24 employees at the Institute, or IEE at Pitt. And I had I had 5 direct reports, and one of them came to me and said, And at your age and your energy, you're never going to retire. So there's no room for any of us to move up and do things that we want to do. And I said, well, I always thought that I gave everybody a lot of room and a lot of flexibility and, all that kind of thing. And they said, yeah, you do, but it's not the same, because I tend to be, a pretty, I don't want to say aggressive, but, forward thinking, always moving person. And so I got that message and I thought about it for a while. And then, a lot of things were happening at the university. I felt I had a really good team of people. My board supported that. The second part of it is my youngest daughter had twins. And my oldest daughter had a single, all within 3 months of each other. And I thought, you know what, I need a little more flexibility in my schedule to spend some time with my new grandchildren. And so that was, the timing was right. It was perfect. My successor, it was a great search that my board did with the provost of the university. There was a big change of moving the IEE out of the business school and into the provost office and ultimately the chancellor's office where it resides now. So it's university-wide resource. And, everything came together. So timing in life is everything as well as your ability. I have to say to every leader, it is an emotional time. And, doing it at the end of the day, why you did it still feels, helps you feel good and go back and think about it in those moments, especially in those last weeks as you're packing and doing your things to say, wow, I should do this or I should do that. But it's good. If you've done the right thing, preparing your organization, preparing your successor, everything's good. And my successor is still someone who I interact with frequently today. And, I'm proud of the fact that it continues as, and I'll just give one thought is that many of the entrepreneurship, / family enterprise programs at universities never last outside of the founder. And today that's changed a little bit, not too much, but a little bit. And I continue to, speak with and discuss with universities how to make that happen and continue onward, because it is important and it doesn't have to end with the founder. It can, succession done right and done timely, it can continue.
That's a fantastic legacy. You created something so impactful in the region, and then you've taken that on the road. You've taken it to other universities and consult, and that's incredible. And I'm sure you're very, very proud of those accomplishments. I was wondering if you could share just a little bit about some of the work that you've done and still do once you left IEE, because you've continued to work with families in what you've called the complex pathways of their lives. And you help them in a lot of ways in areas for their strategy around philanthropic initiatives like family foundations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
As I left and, moved into my retirement phase and spent some good time with my grandchildren that first year, I have to say that as I was looking out as what's next for families, and that became really, in my mind, making the family enterprise alive. And that is that as the business itself is successful and thriving, the family will not, put every dollar that they earn in profits back into the business or, in distributions to increase their lifestyles. Many families were thinking about how do we give back to our community? How do we do things, even more as a family? So we have that activity doing together. And many of them started off with a family foundation and saying, let's look at, maybe they created, a family foundation on paper, but what they wanted to do is have this be a really feel good, beneficial activity of our family, going forward, not only for the current generations, but the future. And they want to give back and impact those things that either have impacted their business, like in one family locally in workplace safety and worker safety is where their family foundation is focused. And others will be on things that have either impacted the family or are of interest to the family, and Lord knows today, especially, there's so many needs that a family can get overwhelmed. And many families want to move from what we call checkbook philanthropy, as you get all these requests in the mail and you write checks, to really studying the issues, studying the idea of where I can make an impact, and those kinds of things. So helping families craft their vision of what they'd like to accomplish, what are the topics or the interests that they have in terms of impacting, and then how do they come together and make decisions not only today, but putting some structure in place so that in the future, the next generation is being brought in earlier and earlier. I had a couple tell me a few years ago saying, and I'm listening to what you're saying, we've given our kids everything, the best houses, the best education, the best vacations, everything, the best experiences. One thing we haven't given them enough of is empathy for their fellow man, empathy for what's happening in the world today and how we can impact. And we're going to really focus on that through our family foundation of learning others that were born or maybe find themselves in situations that are less thriving than our kids were raised in. So it's a win for everybody. And then moving from that, in the where I've spent my time, not only in the family foundations, but families have come together and they're doing more direct investing together on things like that. They're investing in other opportunities that maybe this family or that family puts on the table and say, I'd really like to have some other family investors involved with this. So a lot more direct investing going on now than in the past. And then I think there's a couple of other things, in terms of the family office environment where I have spent the last 4 years dedicated to the family office exchange out of Chicago, working with, high net worth families all over the world in the sense that, okay, we've made this money. Is this 100-year money? Is it 150-year money? I mean, how do we prepare our family to, utilize the success of our ancestors while at the same time preparing for future generations as well? And there's a great book out there by a Rabbi, Stephen Leader, that I used to bring to Pittsburgh, at least once a year at my program called More Money Than God. And it's really about the fact that we are citizens and all in this together. And how can we make this work for ourselves as individuals, for our family, and then as in the community in which we find ourselves.
That's beautiful. And it ties together so many things because you're using the entrepreneurial process to work with these families to craft their vision for what's next as they look at these other chapters in their lives, around the philanthropic pillar or the investing pillar. And it comes back to the values. So I'm going to take a look at that book and I'll include that in the show notes as well. So thank you for sharing that. One question that I wanted to ask you is about statistics. I know there's so many that probably are swirling in your head. What is a statistic that when you think about it, you wish was different, or asked differently just for sake of conversation, that you think is going to be different in the next 10, 20 years that people are really focused on when it's pertaining to family businesses?
That's a really good question and a good thought. And as you're asking that, the first thing that it's a statistic that's different in every country, but overall you hear shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And I think part of that is that there was not the time, and it's funny to read about it even online, because in every language and every culture, that's a common saying. And the reason why is the first generation was the entrepreneurial generation, but what made them strong as a business leader also made them weak, in the sense that a successful entrepreneur often is not the most democratic, is not the most collaborative. Let me get everybody's opinion and think where we're headed with this. So they can be pretty aggressive and domineering because they're focused on mission and what do I need to do to be successful in my business today, tomorrow, and next year. So they have a very focused business, mindset, and that doesn't necessarily make them the most collaborative kind, high communicative father or mother as they're raising their next generation. So the next generation is coming into the business, and they figured out, okay, the way for me to get along with everybody is, sort of stay below radar, don't, put my head up, because it gets, it's like the whack-a-mole thing. I get, in trouble. So they became placekeepers, much more than, dynamic business leaders. And so by the third generation, the money was starting to run out. Maybe the innovation, as we've talked about, or the technology or the personnel were all aging. So they weren't paying as much attention to, okay, how do we keep rejuvenating and rethinking where we are? And there's a fellow out of Southern California, Izhak Adizes, who I brought not him, but some of his people to Pittsburgh when I was at the Institute. And really, they've studied hundreds of thousands of companies. And what they show is that when you play, the bell curve of business is very much there. So you have the beginning, the go-go, the startup years, all of those things that make you either strong or kill you off because you've expanded too fast and you've run out of cash, or you have moved into new products and services where you have no capacity or capabilities, and that's caused you to fail. A lot of things on the way up can derail you, but let's just say you're on that left side of the bell curve moving up, you plateau at the top. It doesn't mean you can stay there. It means you have to think, okay, what's next, so that I start my new bell curve, whether it's, new markets, new regions, new products, new services, new employment, managerial personnel, whatever, so that I don't slide off the right of the bell curve, which is, where there's death valley if we don't make some changes. And so, you look at all of those things, and that's where the third generation sometimes inherits or takes over the business, when it's really on that right-hand curve sliding downward. And all of a sudden they have a hole to dig out of that they may or may not be prepared to do if the second generation had done some of the heavy lifting of preparation and thinking, more than short term, but more, much more longer term, 5, 7, 10 years, out in terms of their business itself. And so those are things that I think that's a statistic that is, I think it's being impacted today, because everyone understands there's no placeholders, there's no placekeepers here. We need to continually challenge ourselves. And having said that, the second thing I see more and more of all the time, which is so great, and that is that the closely held family held business is creating either an advisory board of directors or a board of directors. And they're putting a couple independents, meaning non-family, non-professional advisor, not your, accountant, CPA, attorney, insurance person, but really truly looking at your strategic plan, looking at your industry, where are we headed? And how would someone who has some subject matter expertise or some knowledge how would they add to our board in a good way? And I see more and more of that all the time, because families were, scared. If I put somebody on a board or an advisory board, what if they fire me? What if they tell me I'm an idiot? Those kinds of things. Well, a good governance process done well, you're not going to be putting people on the board who are going to say those things, or in no way can they fire you because you're owners. But I think it's understanding the power they can do to really impact that shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves of 3 generations mantra.
I think you're right. I think there's a core theme of reigniting the entrepreneurial spirit in mature companies and not being fearful of change. Having an independent board of advisors can be really effective as a way for companies to bring in diverse viewpoints and push the company forward on many fronts. But last question for you, I'd love to ask all of my guests if you have a favorite saying or mantra about entrepreneurship.
I would say that my favorite mantra, and I think it's come through here, is be enterprising in all that you do. There's innovation and opportunities everywhere, and just learn of them, take advantage of them. And so be enterprising in all you do, wherever life finds you at that moment. Think differently and think about how you're going to be able to, or embrace something and talk about it and start to make it real.
Well, thank you so much, Ann, for being here today. And you've definitely sparked a lot of ideas to use that phrase. And you're an incredible person. And I just love how you shared your experience. So thank you so much for the conversation today.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Innovation, transition, growth. Easy to say, but hard to do. If you're an entrepreneur facing these challenges, I get it. I work with businesses from small to big. for strategic planning with your team to achieve your vision. Visit smalldotbig.com to schedule a call with me. I'd love to connect with you. Be sure to catch the next Succession Stories episode with more insights for next generation entrepreneurs. Thanks for listening.